Welcome back to the Frontier Pilots. I'm Sergeant Latino, today bringing you more news and speculation on Titanfall 2. Today we'll be discussing just how much Respawn can change in Titanfall 2 before its October 20th release date. But before that, I'd like to discuss why certain members of the community believe changes need to be made in the first place. So for those of you who haven't been keeping up to date with the reactions to the Titanfall 2 beta, you should know that impressions from new and old players alike haven't been painting the game in a brilliant light. That's not to say that the game itself isn't good, or that you should strike it off your to-buy list this fall, but you should know that, at least compared to Titanfall 1, a lot of fundamental aspects of the game have changed. These include such things as movement and Titan build times, which are just a few of the catalysts that are sparking the harsh reaction to Titanfall 2 at the moment. To quickly summarise all that people are saying is wrong with Titanfall 2, let me point you to a PAX Prime 2014 panel discussing AAA combat design hosted by the developers of the Uncharted franchise, Naughty Dog. Two notable guests in this panel included Justin Hendry, lead designer of Titanfall 1, as well as Joel Emile, lead artist of Titanfall 1. On this panel, the two guests from Respawn discussed problems that they saw as needing to be solved during the development of Titanfall 1's multiplayer. Some notable quotes from the talk they gave were as follows. Quote 1. It doesn't matter how good you are, it's not going to be I kill 3 people or I kill 6 people so I get a Titan, and the lesser skilled players don't. Quote 2. Having the AI in the environment as food to help speed up Titan build time. Quote 3. Pilots are always working towards a new Titan. Doesn't matter what you're doing, your Titan timer is always happening. Quote 4. The regenerating shield was the last thing we figured out in Titan combat to really make it work. Before that, your Titan would get damaged to 10% health and it would be worthless. Adding the shield and letting the regen occur made them more viable. And finally, quote 5. Pilots and Titans should be equally viable. We did not spend 80% of our time on either pilots or Titans, and then 20% of our time on the other. It doesn't take a genius to guess why the Titanfall 2 beta is upsetting players, especially in light of these quotes. To call in a Titan, you now must perform at a base standard rather than being a player of any ability. The role of AI in the multiplayer has been massively reduced, there is no Titan build timer anymore, no more regenerating Titan shields, and players are actively questioning the balance between pilots and Titans. In light of these concerns, Respawn and various developers have come out saying that they know players aren't happy and are willing to change things. Matt Everett, Respawn community manager, has come out and said that, quote, Respawn is taking action. Similarly, John Shiring, a lead engineer in Titanfall 2, has come out and said that, quote, Respawn is listening. And finally, the Respawn Twitter account has echoed the same sentiment, telling players that they are, quote, listening to all feedback. So what does this mean exactly? If we are to believe Respawn's words and assume that they are going to make changes to the game, just how much can they change in the month before the game goes gold and in the 2 months before the game releases, by which time they could potentially release a day 1 patch? As someone who works in software development myself, I feel I can offer some insight here. So the Titanfall 2 beta presents a few problems that players want fixed or changed. We are going to first list each problem and then sort said problem into either an MVP stack, which in software development stands for minimum viable product, that is to say something that they can quickly chuck in and then work on stabilizing or balancing later, or we'll sort it into a long-term development stack, something that likely won't make it for launch, but could theoretically make it into the game a few weeks or months after. The first and perhaps most controversial change that Respawn made was with player movement. Put simply, a lot of players perceive the new movement to be slower or more cumbersome, and they want to revert it to Titanfall 1's movement system model. Now, whether Respawn choose to bring back the Titanfall 1 movement system, or simply tweak the existing one, this is something that could make it in for launch. They could go as far as to simply copy and paste Titanfall 1's movement system model into Titanfall 2 right now, and work out any small niggles with it later. So this goes in our MVP stack, and as such this is something which could potentially be in for launch. The second most important issue, at least as I perceive it, is maps. Now we only have 2 maps to work off here, at least for the first beta weekend, so who knows, maybe these are just very unique maps and come launch the rest of them will be more to the community's liking. However, let's assume that the map design philosophy of more restricted movement lanes and routes carries through to the other dozen or so maps. Unfortunately, this isn't something that can be considered minimum viable product. They can't simply chop and change the maps, potentially breaking them and opening them up to exploits with a month to go before discs are pressed for launch. This is unfortunately an issue which will require hundreds of man-hours of development and retesting to fix, and as such we'd be lucky to see changes to these maps even make it in post-launch, if at all. Regardless of what Respawn decides to do with these maps, they are not changing it for launch. All we can hope is that the other maps are, well, much better than the tech tests come launch. The third issue is Titan build times. Respawn has made this a score streak rather than a countdown timer in Titanfall 2, and a lot of people want this changed. This issue doesn't require much effort at all. In fact, an intern could probably be sent to source the Titan build timer method from Titanfall 1's code and just stick it into Titanfall 2. Obviously I'm oversimplifying it a bit, but this is definitely an MVP issue, and even if the countdown timer is chucked in without much thought in regards to balancing for launch, it could easily be refined and balanced in the weeks and months following launch. The fourth issue is a contentious one, regenerating shields for Titans. Now this I would still consider MVP, however it's not as simple as chucking in old code. In my estimation, the inclusion of new mechanics, most notably the battery system, would require not only extensive balancing work, but a new system of interplay between batteries and regenerating Titan shields to be developed before launch. Will you start with regenerating shields? Will you need a new battery to get one? If your shield becomes completely depleted, will that require a new battery? These are all issues outside of technical development that need to be solved. As such, I'll conclude that regenerating Titan shields could make it in for launch if just barely, but may potentially only come in post-launch due to the fact that Respawn will have to do more than simply code in shields. They'll have to plan for it logistically. The fifth issue is definitely going to be a tough one for me to categorize: AI bots. As it stands, there is only one mode in the whole of Titanfall 2 that has bots, as compared to nearly all modes in Titanfall 1. Players want bots back in all modes in Titanfall 2, along with the unique animations and battle cries that they had in Titanfall 1. So because bots are already in Titanfall 2 in some capacity, it is possible, but probably overly optimistic, to assume that Respawn could simply take the existing bots in Titanfall 2 and extrapolate them across all maps and modes. In theory this is possible, and they could just chuck them in without regard for balancing or real placement for launch day, and tweak it immediately following that in the weeks and months following launch. However, I don't feel that would be terribly responsible, and speaking as a software engineer myself, I'd have doubts if I was tasked with such a thing. Ultimately, I have to conclude that bots won't make it in for launch, and so this goes in the long-term development stack. However, given Respawn's free DLC plan, I could easily envisage them doing a AI bots update 3 or 4 months from launch, updating all maps and modes with bots and selling it as new content. In conclusion then, we can say that bots probably won't make it in for launch, but this may well be added in a few months down the line. So that's my input as someone familiar with software development as to what and what isn't reasonable to expect from Titanfall come launch. Issues I notably haven't touched on are things like general weapon and pilot v Titan balancing, but these are things I think that are going to be inevitably looked into by Respawn at some point anyway, and patches will come and go addressing this sort of thing, both at launch and beyond. Anyway, that's it from me, pilots. What's your input? Do you think these potential changes and timetables for them are enough to redeem the game for you? Are you more or less optimistic about the potential for Respawn to fix things than before? Let me know down in the comments, and please leave a dislike or a like depending on how you enjoyed the video. Subscribe for more news from the frontier, and I'll talk to you in my next video.